Okay, let's try that again to see if we can do it without feedback. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the webinar today. Today we're going to chat about how to add a product onto your RTO scope of registration. Before we kick off, like I said, welcome everybody. For those who haven't attended any of the previous webinars or that don't know me, my name is Alex Schroder, and I will be going through with you today on the webinar. So what are we covering today? Today we're looking at how to prepare for an addition to scope application. Now, with that, the requirements of clause 1.8 is very important to be able to meet, and we're also going to be looking at the requirements of clause 1.8 specifically insofar as resources. And with resources, I'm talking about learning resources, assessment resources, human resources, as well as physical resources. And then very importantly, we're also going to be looking and chatting about your training and assessment strategy. We're going to be looking very briefly at the addition to scope process, your audit preparation, marketing materials, and what's next from there. So to jump straight in, for those of you that don't know me, I have been in the vet sector now for longer than I care to remember. I work as a compliance rectification specialist, and I also spend a lot of my time in the tribunal helping RTOs fight ASQA sanctions and obviously use their retain their registrations. I sit on the ITICA State Committee. I work on the ASQA Stakeholder Liaison duties. There's quite a lot that I do. Feel free to have a look at my LinkedIn profile if you want to know a bit more about me and what it is that I do. So let's jump straight in. When we are preparing for an addition to a scope application, we need to be very, very certain that we meet the requirements of clause 1.8. And guys, quite simply, clause 1.8, the clause 1.8 summarized says that an RTO must at all times have sufficient resources on or at their disposal and ready to go for any single training product that is on its scope. And the same applies for when you are doing an addition to scope. So when we look at clause 1.8, you need to make sure that before you do your addition to scope application, you need to make sure that you've acquired all of the learning resources that you're going to need. And remember, when we speak about learning resources, we're speaking about the actual learning materials that your students are going to be learning from. We've also got to ensure that we've got all of our assessment tools for the product that we want to add to scope. When we speak about assessment tools, remember that includes your RPL tools as well. So often RTOs forget that assessment tools, their suite of assessment tools must include RPL tools. And it's really easy to forget about your RPL tools, especially if you are delivering something which very few people actually do apply for RPL for. However, if you don't have your RPL tools ready, it means that you don't have your resources ready. And therefore, it means that you're not ready to apply for your addition to scope. When we're looking at your assessment tools, please also remember that when you put your addition to scope in, your assessment tools must have been QA'd. It must have been quality assured to make sure that your assessment tools are valid, that the evidence being able to collect from them would be sufficient, and also that your assessment tools meet all of the requirements of the unit of competency or the training product and or the training package that it sits in. You need to make sure that your training and assessment strategy has been developed, is correct, and also outlines exactly what it is or how it is that you're going to be delivering this training product or training products that you are applying to have added to your scope. And don't forget, when we do our TASs, when we do our training and assessment strategies, it is absolutely vital that we do our industry consultation. And remember that in your TAS does actually reflect the industry consultation that you've done So when you are getting ready to apply for your addition to scope, your TAS is one of the vital documents that you need to have ready as well. You've also got to make sure that you have sufficient physical resources in order to go and deliver the training products that you are applying to have added to your scope. Now, your physical resources, they may be, if you are delivering this online, it may be that you have that your online systems can support additional students. It may be that if you are going to be delivering this face-to-face, that you actually have the training facilities. And don't forget that certain training products also require you to have certain resources at hand when you are delivering the training. And when I think about that, I'm thinking, for argument's sake, and this is just one example, I'm thinking about the cert or the unit, a first aid unit. Now, in a first aid unit, you've actually got to have a certain number of mannequins. You've got to have a certain number of baby mannequins and adult mannequins. You've got to have the defibrillators, I can never say that word, at hand. There's a whole list in the unit of competency that actually tells you what you need to have handy and what you need to use when you are delivering the unit of competency. So it is really important that your RTO has acquired that prior to you doing your application to scope, because remember that as soon as your scope application is approved, for all intents and purposes, your RTO is allowed to start marketing and delivering those training products the moment that it goes in your scope. So what the regulator is looking for and what is so essential for your RTO is that you have everything ready so that when it is added to scope, you can just go. It is absolutely vital to have those ready before you do your application to scope, and you cannot or you should not have or adapt the thought process of we'll first get it on scope and then we'll acquire the resources. And I'll discuss it with you. I'll discuss the reason for that with you just a little bit later. So what is our addition to scope process? Guys, it's so easy these days. You simply log on to AskForNet. You go and do the, you go and click the button that says you're making a minor change to your scope. You then do your scope application. You identify what units of competency and or qualifications you want to add to scope. And then very importantly, that there will be a declaration that your CEO will sign to say, look, we are ready to go. All the information is correct and we are actually ready to go. If you are applying for a training product that is part of a licensing requirement, that requires you to actually evidence that. And similarly, if you are adding an accredited course to your scope, you actually need to have the permission of the accredited course owner for your RTO to add that course to your scope. Now, this is an important thing because, or important point, because we've seen over the last, I'd say probably about 18 to 24 months, we've seen a large number of applications for accredited courses being received by ASWA, and we've also seen a large number of courses being accredited by ASWA. Please remember that even if you work for the RTO that owns the accredited course, if you work for the RTO that's going to deliver the accredited course and you own that course, you still need to give that RTO permission or a license to go and deliver that course. And in the same vein, let's say for argument's sake that you actually own your own, or that you are the RTO owner, you've gone and you have written the accredited course. Unless that accredited course has the RTO that will be delivering it as the course owner, you actually need to include either a signed license agreement between you as the accredited course owner and the RTO that will be delivering the accredited course, or you need to provide some kind of, you as the accredited course owner needs to provide to the RTO that will be delivering the course permission to use your course material. and that is going to need to go into, or is going to have to be submitted with your scope addition application. So often people make the mistake, especially when they are new or when they are new accredited course owners, or if this is the first time that the RTO is adding an accredited course to their scope, they make the mistake and they forget to actually include that the written consent of the accredited course owner to have the course added to scope. The next thing, of course, is that you then need to start looking at the marketing of the scope additions. Now, please remember that you cannot start to market the course that you've applied to have added to a scope until such time as, sorry guys, I'm having a bit of a tongue twister today. You can't start marketing the course that you've applied for addition to scope until such time as it is actually on your scope. More importantly, or as importantly as well, you can't even start putting teasers out there to say, hey guys, we've applied to have this on scope, watch the space, you know, we'll have an answer soon, because that is marketing. And remember, both the NBR Act and the standards clearly prohibit the marketing of anything or any training product that isn't on our scope of registration. Do we have any questions up until now? Lucy, you've asked, why do we need to have our training and assessment strategies developed before before a training product is on scope? Guys, to go back to what I said earlier on, remember that the moment that a training product has been added to your scope, as far as the regulator is concerned, you then have carte blanche to go and deliver that training product. And in order for us to do the addition to scope, we do need to make sure we've got all our ducks lined up in a row. It's almost like, imagine that you're going to host a dinner party. And imagine that let's say you're hosting a dinner party for 8 people on Friday night or on Saturday night. We don't wait until, or normally, we don't wait until the guests of the dinner party have arrived to then start thinking, what am I going to cook? And then start rummaging in our pantry cupboard to go and find the ingredients for the dinner. Normally, or if you guys operate like I do, normally it's a case of, if I'm going to host a dinner party on Saturday, once I know who's going to attend, and before I start getting ready for Saturday on the day, I sit down and I think, okay, I've got these people coming. This is what the menu is going to look like. Then I go and make my shopping list to go and buy the ingredients for my menu. Then I go and plan how my day is going to go. Only because I'm a bit of an OCD nerd and I don't like last minute stressors. But not only that, it's a case of, you know, I'm pre-planning what my meal is going to look like at the dinner party. Similarly, if you are going to add something to scope, all of your planning is done before you do your scope addition. You make sure all of your resources are there, and Lucy, that does include your TAS as well. Annie, you've asked why we need to have our learning resources and our assessment resources ready. Exactly the same reasons I've just explained. We need to make sure that as soon as that item is added to our scope, that we are ready to go on the spot. James, you've asked why we need to go and QA our assessment tools before we do the addition to scope application. Remember, James, that we need to make sure, or part of the obligation of an RTO is to make sure that it does actually have compliant assessment tools, or that it uses compliant assessment tools, and that our assessment tools are that we have been assured, that we've assured ourselves before we start implementing assessment tools, that those assessment tools are actually valid and that they can actually produce sufficient evidence from our learners as they use them. So making sure that your assessment tools are completely valid is all part of your preparation as well. Just looking, are there any other further questions? Not that I can see right now. So if we then look, and the biggest question I always get asked is, if we do an addition to scope, are we likely to be audited? Guys, the short answer is maybe, maybe not. And I know that isn't a very helpful answer, and actually the short answer is depends. How's that for a one-word answer? I know it isn't a very helpful answer, but I'm going to expand on that a little bit. Whether or not your RTO is going to be audited as part of your scope, addition to scope application, is all going to depend on a few things. The first factor that the regulator is most likely going to consider is your RTO's risk rating. RTOs with relatively low risk ratings are less likely to be audited as part of the addition to scope application as RTOs with a higher risk rating. Similarly, if your RTO has very recently gone through an audit and it has passed to flying colours, the likelihood of the regulator coming and re-auditing your RTO as part of your scope application is very low. And please note, you guys, I'm not saying it won't happen, I'm saying it is low. On the other hand, let's say for argument's sake that your RTO has a higher risk rating. Let's say for argument's sake that your RTO has a recent history of non-compliances. Or let's say that your RTO was in the recent past sanctioned in any way, shape or form. Then you are more likely to be audited, and then you certainly should be ready to be audited as part of your scope application process. And so often what we find, and in fact, the VETPrep team and I are currently working on three matters where RTOs applied for addition to scope, or they submitted addition to scope applications, and ASPA came in and they had a look and they did a full audit on all of the RTOs. In the one instance, this RTO had a fairly robust history of ongoing non-compliances, so it was almost a no-brainer that the regulator was going to come in and look at everything, or at least most of the operations. The other RTO that we are currently helping with that as well, they passed audit, I think it was, where are we now? We're in May 22. They had passed audit approximately January 2021. And yet the regulator came in and they decided to do a full audit as well. Now remember that if the regulator comes in and they do decide to do an audit, they're not only going to audit your readiness for having the addition to scope approved. They're not only going to look at the documents pertinent to the training products that you are applying to have added to your scope, they are going to, in all likelihood, do an audit of your full operations in the RTO. One of these RTOs that I was speaking about a few minutes ago that we are helping, they, as I said, they applied for a scope addition, and I think if memory serves, I think it was for a diploma of, it wasn't even a high-risk diploma, I think it might have been a diploma of business or something. ASCA came in, this one RTO had, they actually own two RTOs, and the one RTO had applied for an addition to scope. Because both RTOs were owned by the same, or had the same high managerial agents, and because both RTOs had the same ownership structure, ASPA came in and they audited the one RTO first, found a heap of non-compliances, and then they decided to go and audit the second RTO. Even though the second RTO was not the RTO that did the addition to scope application, they still went and audited both RTOs. And the reason why the regulator does that is their thought process is, well, if you run multiple RTOs, if one RTO is non-compliant and your internal operations, your internal quality assurance processes and your own self-assurance process hasn't picked that up, there's a very good likelihood that there's going to be non-compliances with the other RTO as well. ASPA came in, both RTOs were sanctioned, and it is now it's now pretty hectic because both RTOs for this one particular client, both RTOs are now prohibited from doing any marketing, taking any enrollments. In fact, We've actually in the process of applying for a stay application for them, because as of, I think there's another 2 weeks' time, where the decisions come in place and the RTO's hands are essentially tied. So when it comes to the question of will we be audited, the best advice that I can give you, and my strongest recommendation is that if you make application to change anything in your RTOs or on your RTO scope of registration, even if you go in to notify ASQA of a change of managerial agent, if you go into ASQA to go and make any changes whatsoever, before you go and make those changes, it is a really good idea, and it's really good and sound business practice to make sure that your RTO is audit ready. Because remember, any kind of change that we advise ASQA of, any kind of application for a change of details, any application for an addition to scope will automatically shine a spotlight on the RTO, and the regulator will then come in and they will then assess whether or not they believe an audit is required before the change is actually implemented. And sometimes what even happens is your RTO may put in for change of details, be it change of scope, addition or deletion. It may be change of physical location where delivery is taking place. Any kind of notification that happens through ASQA, we often see that you may not be audited before your scope application goes in, or before even your scope is, before your scope addition is approved, but you may very well be audited shortly thereafter. So the best, once again, the best that I can suggest to you guys is that, and my best recommendation is, before you go onto ASQA and make any changes to your RTO's operations, be very, very sure that you are 100% audit ready, because once again, going onto ASQA and making those changes does put a spotlight on your RTO, and it's almost impossible for you to know beforehand whether or not that's going to trigger an audit. So where to from here? Before you go and do an addition to scope, prepare. Make sure that you've got all your learning resources ready. Make sure you've got your assessment tools. Make sure that your assessment tools have been quality assured. Make sure that you've even validated them to make sure that there are no gaps. Make sure that your trainers and assessors all meet the requirements of clause 1.13 to 1.16, including their industry currency, their VETPD, the qualifications that they hold, etc. Make sure that they are ready to go. Make sure that you've got enough support staff, for argument's sake, to be able to support the increased numbers of students that you're expecting. Make sure that your physical resources are in order. Make sure that your human resources are there. Make sure that your delivery locations are intact. And make sure that your RTO is ready to go as soon as your scope addition comes through. And I don't know how many of you guys have noticed, so often the scope additions are actual changes to your scope is actually made overnight. So we go to bed one night, we're waiting for the good news, we wake up the next morning, it's there. Make sure that you are ready to go before you put your application for scope addition in. And always, always, always be audit ready. Because please believe me, if you are not audited, or if your RTO isn't audited as part of your scope addition application, i.e. before the scope addition is approved, they may very well, the regulator may very well come in and they may very well come and audit you after the addition to scope has been approved. And guys, it might be a week, it might be a month, it might be 3 months. We just don't know. But despite the fact that all RTOs at all times must be audit ready, it is even more vital to do so when you've made any kind of changes to your RTO's operations on ASQA, and especially if you applied for an addition to scope. What are the consequences of not being compliant with clause 1.8? So what are the consequences of putting your scope application in? The regulator comes in and they do an audit and they do find that you are non-compliant. Needless to say, non-compliance with any of the standards, including clause 1.8, can ultimately lead to regulatory sanctions or cancellation of your RTO's registration. Having said that in the current ASCLA and how ASCLA, or with ASCLA's current audit practices, they are very, very unlikely. In fact, we haven't seen many, if any, cases since 2020 where they will come in and they will automatically, at first instance, go and threaten a cancellation. However, like I said, if you're non-compliant with clause 1.8, so let's say that, and to elaborate on that, if you go and do your addition to scope application without having all your ducks in a row, without having all of your resources ready, and you are audited, then you are potentially non-compliant with 8 or more clauses of the standards. And like I said, that could lead to regulatory sanctions, it could lead to cancellations. But even if it doesn't lead to a regulatory sanction, it's also going to, remember, if ASCLA comes in and they audit you and your practices are not compliant, it's going to increase your risk rating, which means that down the track, if you do another addition to scope, your risk rating is higher, and therefore your chances of being audited has automatically also increased. The clauses I said just now, that if we are not ready, if we don't have all of our resources ready at the time that we do an application of scope, I said that it affects, or we could potentially be non-compliant with 8 or more clauses of the standards. And if you think about it, we would be non-compliant with clause 1.1, which means, and clause 1.1 is all about our monitoring our training and assessment practices. We could be non-compliant with clause 1.3, which means that, which says that we should have enough trainers and assessors and resources ready to deliver. We could be non-compliant with clause 1.4, which says that the RTO must meet all of the requirements of the relevant training package or course. We would, we would definitely be non-compliant with clause 1.8a. That is all about our assessment system. And remember, clause 1.8a is all about, as an RTO, we need to have an assessment system where we are ready to assess or to deliver quality training and assessment with the resources that we need and with the quality of the resources that we need. Potentially, we could be non-compliant with clause 1.13 A to C, which is all about our trainers and assessors. There's also clause 1.16, which is about ongoing vet professional development. We could potentially be non-compliant with that. We would definitely be non-compliant with clause 2.1 of the standards, which says that an RTO must ensure that it complies with the standards at all times. We could potentially be non-compliant with clause 8.1, clause 8.5. Guys, at the end of the day, it simply isn't worth it. If we have a look at how many non-compliances we could be hit with, simply because we haven't done our preparation for our addition to scope properly, it simply isn't worth it. I have got a number of questions coming up. So, James, you've asked once again. You've said, so is it absolutely certain that we will be audited if we do an addition to scope? As I've just said, you know, it's the luck of the draw. It all depends on your RTO's risk rating. It all depends on the last time you were audited. It all depends on the audit outcomes. There is so much that could be at stake when the regulator makes a decision to audit or not to audit. My question, I guess, to you is it worth taking the risk? We have more questions. I love questions. Just give me 1 second. I don't know how to put it on the page, so just bear with me. Oh, Todd, brilliant question. Does the Cert for TAE automatically trigger an in-house audit? Todd, I'm thinking that you probably mean a regulatory audit, because in-house audits are when we go and do our own audits. And yes, if you apply to have the Cert for TAE added to your scope, you will be audited. You will absolutely be audited. And the reason for that is all TAE products are high-risk products. So, and TAE is probably sitting at one of the higher levels of high risk. So if you are thinking of applying for a Cert for TAE on scope, please make sure that you are absolutely audit ready. And in fact, Todd, I even suggest to you that it's a longer conversation than we could probably have right now. Give me a call or send me an email after the webinar if you guys are thinking of adding TAE to scope. Give me a call and let me just talk you through what to expect in a TAE audit. And guys, it also applies to all TAE products. So it's not only the Cert for, it's even if you are applying for one of the diplomas in TAE, you must be ready for an audit, because you will be audited before it is added to scope. What other questions do I have? Hold on. Luciana, you've asked the same question, whether Cert for is going to order it's going to trigger an audit. Another one that I've got here, we are still waiting on resources. Can we still put the course on scope, as it is a new qualification with a current training package, so we have on scope? No. If you're still waiting on your resources, please do not go and apply to have it put on scope. Guys, at the moment, ASQA is probably taking their turnaround time for doing an addition to scope without audit is somewhere between about 12 to 20 working days. Although what I have been finding is that if they do take a little bit long, sorry, not 20 working days, 12 to 20 weekdays. And what I have found is if it starts leaning more towards the 20 calendar days, if you email us when you say, hey guys, I'm still waiting, what's up, then it could be that yours has just gone to the bottom of the pile, and they are very responsive to that. But given that we've even got RTOs that are having scope additions done within a few days, given that it doesn't take long these days for an addition to scope application to go through, you need to have all of your resources ready. If you're still waiting for your resources, then wait until your resources are there. Wait until you have QA'd your resources, and then put your addition to scope application in. Because let's say, for argument's sake, you do your addition to scope application, and ASQA come to you a week later and say, we want to do an audit on you. And you go, but we're waiting for resources, you can't come in yet. Or ASQA comes and audits and they say, well, where's your resources for this training product? And you go, we're still waiting for it. You've got yourself an automatic headache there, because they're not going to be sympathetic. Remember, the NVR Act says that you've got to be ready, you've got to have everything ready to go, and don't wait. Oh, sorry, don't do your application to scope until you actually have it. Just looking to see other questions that we've got. Guys, bear with me. I'm not too great with reading this here, reading the questions here. So let me have a look. Audit. Next question is, Alec, I'm well. Thank you so much for checking in. Is there any tips? Todd, you've asked, are there any tips for getting the Cert for TAE on scope? Oh, there we go. You're never too old to learn. I've just found out how to bring the questions up much easier, so they should go a bit better. Just give me one tick. Todd, are there any tips for getting ready to have cert for added to scope? This is kind of open. Sorry, not Todd, it's Angela. Todd, I'm so sorry, Angela, my apologies. I was only seeing your last name. Angela, once again, this is a conversation where it's going to potentially take us quite a bit of time to go through. Won't you please give me a call and let me chat you through it? Because as I said, it's going to be a long, convoluted conversation, which isn't necessarily going to be helpful to everybody else. But please contact me. I'd love to talk you through it. Marianne, you've asked us, cancelling RTO registration trigger an audit from ASQA? Ordinarily, no. However, there are a number of steps that need to be taken. If you are going to cancel your RTO's registration, and once again, please feel free to contact me. I'd be more than happy to talk you through what you do need to do when you are going to be winding up an RTO. Next one. Spelling for my PD report. Tanya, you've asked, can you get the spelling for my name for my PD report? You'll actually get a certificate of attendance after this. Angela, I've discussed that one. Angela, you've asked, what about if we have a teach-out period with a superseded package? I'm not 100% sure that I understand your question. Would you mind just rephrasing it for me? I'd love to get back to that. Paul, you've asked, when will ASQA start charging for scope additions on application or on approval? I believe how it's going to work, because remember at the moment we are in a hiatus period and that ends on the 1st of July. I believe that there's going to be a, and I do need to check this and potentially get back to you, but I believe the model that they're looking at is that there will be an application fee and you will actually pay the fee on application. So, and in fact, it has always worked on application, not on approval, because regardless whether or not your application is approved, they've still got to go through the same amount of work to actually assess your application. David, why do we need RPL tools if we're never going to offer RPL? RPL tools are part of your assessment suite that you need to have. Remember that the NBR Act says, unless it is prohibited by another act, that you need to offer RPL to every single person. So unless you are delivering a licensing product, like, let's say for argument's sake that you're delivering something like scaffolding, and part of those licensing regulations indicate or say that you're not allowed to RPL. I'm not saying I don't, I'm using it as an example. If you're offering a licensing course and the licensing course's restrictions are that you cannot offer RPL, that's different. For everything else, you must always offer students the opportunity to RPL. Now, it could very well be that you only have students taking up that RPL offer once in a blue moon. It doesn't matter. Your RPL tools are part of your assessment tool suite, and you have to have RPL tools, or otherwise you are non-compliant with so many of the clauses. But not only that, these days when ASQA come in for audits, they seem to be one of the first things that they ask when they start looking at your assessment tools. They ask for your RPL kit. And guys, please also be very, very careful. And this isn't a discussion about assessment tools. That's a different webinar. But please also know that when you go and develop your RPL kits and your RPL tools, you can't simply go onto the unit requirements on TGA, copy and paste it over to your kit. Your kit will be non-compliant. Alex, you have asked, will adding a course trigger an ASQA audit? As we said earlier on, it all depends on your RTO's audit history. It depends on when your last audit was done. It depends on your risk rating. It depends on so many variables. And that is why we always suggest that RTOs, before they make any changes to their on AskConnect, to their operations, whether it is an addition or even change in management details, always be audit ready, because if you're not, Murphy's Law says they will come in and there will then potentially be a lot of angst. And not only that, you know, guys, it's a heck of a burden on an RTO's operation, both insofar as time commitment and just the stress levels of the team members involved in getting ready for an audit. Audits can be so incredibly stressful on the RTO's operations, on the RTO staff. It's always a good idea to be 100% audit ready 100% of the time. But if you are in a position where, for some reason or the other, your RTO can't always be 100% audit ready, make sure that before you do any changes, any additions to your scope, any additions to or deletions or replacements of key managerial staff, etc., before you go and do any changes on AskConnect, please make sure that you are audit ready. Guys, are there any other further questions? How's this for a good one? It's 12:40, and we have gone through what we needed to go through in the webinar. Oh, here we go. There's another one. Hold on. No, that was a teach-out period that I still don't quite understand. It's 12:40. We've gone through what I wanted to share with you vis-a-vis additions to scope. We've gone through the answers, and I don't believe there's any reason for us to continue for another 19 minutes. Before we wrap up, any last-minute questions that you guys want to shoot at me? Remember also that if you have any questions, or if you think of any questions after this, just send an email to info@complianceinstitute.edu.au, and we'll get back to you. Or if you rather want to just chat with me yourself, give us a call. It really is as easy. I know that sometimes when people do send emails with questions after a webinar, I know that sometimes the emails go into spam, and ARCP doesn't check its spam filters often. So if you do have a burning question, give me a call. Or alternatively, please keep my contact details up for you. Do I have my mobile number here? I do not. Bugger. I'll take you back to ARCP's. Gosh, now I'm really mucking this up, aren't I? I'll take you back to ARCP's contact numbers. If you have a burning question, if you want to have a chat about it, you know, sooner rather than later, give us a call. Just ask them to just ask them to connect them to me. And similarly, if you've emailed a question, you haven't heard back from the ARCP team, pick up the phone. Go old school. Just pick up the phone. Before I say goodbye to you, please go and have a look on the RTOPD website. That is www.rtopd.com.au. I know that yesterday the RT team went and they on the website, they went and linked some more of the upcoming courses for the registration forms. Guys, please do go and register for the webinars as soon as possible, because spaces are almost limited. Today, we are actually beyond capacity, and I believe there was a waiting list of 14 people that just couldn't get into the webinar. So it's always a numbers capacity, but also what we have started doing is we actually now stopping registrations, I think at 8 o'clock in the morning or something like that. So as of 8 o'clock in the morning of the webinar, registrations close. So please get your registrations in as soon as possible. Please make sure that you put the correct email address and the correct mobile number on there, because what ARCP does is it sends reminders of the webinar, the day of the webinar. It also sends your webinar links. And if we don't have your correct email address, you won't get those. Similarly, if we don't have your correct mobile number, or if you have decided not to leave a mobile number, but a landline number instead, you simply will not get your text message to say, hey, remember, it starts. With that, thank you guys also very much. It's always wonderful to see the regulars. It's always wonderful to see new people joining the webinar. We've had an interesting mix of people here today. We've had auditors, we've had consultants, we've had compliance practitioners, we've had operational staff from RTOs, we've had the regulars, we've had some former and present AICP students, we've had some VETPrep clients. It's wonderful. I love doing this with you guys.